The sanctuary floor was still warm. Not from candles or sunlight. From bodies kneeling in rows for hours, unmoving. The hymn books were open to the same page, but no one was singing. The lesson was already understood. They believed discipline was love. To understand how this belief was shaped, and why so many accepted suffering as devotion, we need to return to the outskirts of Hinesville, Georgia, in the early 1980s. The town was small, the land flat, and the roads traced old military routes that ended at the edge of quiet pine forests. The House of Prayer Christian Church was founded not with trumpets or local celebration, but with quiet certainty. Its pastor, Arthur Allen Jr., did not present himself as charismatic in the traditional sense. He did not preach spectacle. He preached order. And for many who came to him, order felt like safety. The families who joined were not searching for miracles. They were searching for structure. Some came from fractured homes. Some came from military backgrounds. Some simply believed the world was becoming morally chaotic and needed a firm hand. Allen's sermons spoke directly to that fear. He taught that love without authority was weakness, that obedience made the soul strong, and that God's favor could be recognized through the endurance of correction. This was not framed as brutality. It was framed as care. The church was small at first. A converted house. A few folding chairs. A plain wooden podium. No stained glass. No choir loft. Only a cross on the wall, simple and unadorned. People gathered quietly. They listened. They repeated scripture. They prayed. And they accepted discipline from the beginning, though the word was not yet spoken aloud. What made the House of Prayer different from other strict holiness congregations was not its theology on the surface. Many churches in the rural South preached obedience, family hierarchy, and the authority of Scripture. What set this congregation apart was the way those ideals were enforced. Not as guidelines. Not as moral persuasion. But as law. Allen taught that a child's spirit must be shaped early, before the world has time to claim it. Parents were instructed to discipline children in love, meaning calm, controlled physical correction. The phrase was repeated often. Calm. Controlled. In love. The tone mattered as much as the act. Anger was forbidden, but force was required. This distinction made the violence feel righteous, not emotional. It created the illusion of spiritual neutrality. But correction did not remain confined to the household. Over time, Allen introduced collective discipline. Children who disobeyed during lessons were disciplined in front of the group. Adults were chastised publicly for questioning instruction. Marriages were restructured with Allen's approval. Some were encouraged. Others were separated. Romantic attachment was replaced with alignment. It was said that families in the House of Prayer were not bound by blood or affection, but by obedience. The congregation developed its own internal language. Words like submission, covering, and correction took on new meanings. Worship was no longer only prayer. It was posture. Kneeling until the knees numbed. Standing until the legs trembled. Waiting for instruction. Silence became a form of devotion. Eye contact became permission. Those who were corrected were required to thank those who corrected them. This environment did not feel chaotic. It felt calm. That was the most disturbing part. There were no raised voices.
No dramatic scenes. No visible anger.
When children cried, they were told to breathe. When adults faltered, they were reminded that love was patient and strong. The community believed that pain was temporary but righteousness was eternal. And because the suffering was framed as spiritual discipline rather than punishment, those who endured it felt chosen, not harmed. From the outside, the House of Prayer looked like any other church. White siding. A gravel driveway. A simple sign. Services on Wednesday and Sunday. Neighbors may have noticed the children walked in single-file lines. They may have noticed that the families did not socialize much. But the building itself did not reveal what happened inside. The silence did. Because the most effective tool Alan used was not physical discipline. It was shame. To question correction was to challenge divine order. To hesitate was to reveal weakness. To speak against the church was to confess spiritual failure. The congregation was trained to turn inward, not outward, for interpretation of reality. Which meant that even as the discipline escalated, even as bruises formed in patterns, even as marriages shifted into power structures rather than partnership, no one saw themselves as victims. They saw themselves as devoted. And devotion is difficult to break, especially when it is shaped by love. But devotion is not immune to fracture. Cracks form quietly, often in the smallest places. For the house of prayer, those fractures would begin with one child. A child who did not respond to silence. A child who could not learn to kneel still. A child whose body revealed what belief tried to hide. And when that happened, the sanctuary floor grew warm again. This time, not from devotion, but from consequence. The child's name was not spoken in official sermons. Not at first. But everyone in the congregation knew who he was. He was 5 years old. Thin. Restless. He had trouble keeping still during the long kneeling prayers, and when he was told to fold his hands, he fidgeted. When he was told to keep silent, he whispered. Not loudly. Just enough that the words broke the rhythm of the room. The problem was not the noise. The problem was what it represented. In the house of prayer, obedience was not about behavior. It was about the soul. A child who could not be still was a child whose spirit had not yet been shaped, which meant the parents had failed, which meant correction was required. This correction began at home. The parents were instructed to discipline him with what was called the rod, a thin fiberglass wand, flexible enough to sting but not break skin. It was always referred to as the rod, never as a switch or belt or stick. The word connected the act to Scripture, giving it religious authority. It made the violence feel ordained. But the child did not respond to the rod the way others did. He did not become compliant. He did not become still. He cried. He resisted. His distress was interpreted as rebellion, not pain. In communities like this, resistance is not merely disobedience. It is seen as spiritual warfare. So the correction escalated. Parents were called forward during gatherings. The child was brought to the front. Alan would speak calmly about the importance of shaping the young spirit before the world took root in him. The congregation listened without expression. Eyes down. Hands clasped. Discipline became public. The child learned to be silent. But silence was not enough. His body still trembled. His breathing was uneven. His shoulders tensed at every touch. These physical reactions were interpreted as further disobedience, a lack of surrender. So the discipline extended in duration. Hours-long kneeling, held postures, cold floors. The parents aged under the weight of it, not because they doubted the doctrine, but because devotion in practice is exhausting. Yet exhaustion itself was interpreted as weakness, which required correction. The circle tightened. And this is where the house of prayer shifted from strict religious community into controlled behavioral system. 1. The authority structure. Alan's word was final. Not just in prayer, but in marriage, child-rearing, employment choices, and even friendships. He framed this not as control, but as spiritual guidance. Many found comfort in relief from decision-making. Structure can feel like safety when the world outside feels unpredictable. 2. The isolation pattern. Members were encouraged to reduce contact with anyone who questioned church practice, including family. Outsiders were described as spiritually blind. This did not feel like separation. It felt like protection. 3. The language shift. Everyday actions became moral statements. A child fidgeting was not a child fidgeting. It was disobedience. A spouse expressing concern was not communicating. It was rebellion. Words themselves changed meaning, which meant reality changed with them. Once language shifts, the world follows. And yet, to the outside, nothing looked extraordinary. Families went to the grocery store. Children played in yards. Members attended local schools. They were quiet, polite, well-mannered. Teachers described the children as disciplined and respectful. The signs of harm were subtle. Not bruises. Not wounds. Stillness. The kind learned, not natural. The fracture in the congregation came when a school nurse noticed that the child's silence did not come from shyness. He did not respond when spoken to. He flinched at sudden movement. His shoulders remained slightly raised, as if bracing. These are the marks of conditioned fear, not temperament. A report was filed. Authorities made a welfare visit. The child's parents were calm. Their home was clean. The pantry was stocked. The family appeared stable, quiet, orderly. There were no marks to point to, because the correction was designed never to leave visible trace. The visit ended without intervention. This is the pattern common in systems of controlled obedience. Harm hidden behind normalcy is difficult to prove. The child remained in the church. The discipline continued. But something inside the congregation shifted. Not openly. Not spoken. A quiet recognition. The child's suffering was no longer interpreted purely as spiritual shaping. Some members saw it as excessive. Not many. Not loudly. But enough. In systems like this, the first sign of fracture is not rebellion. It is hesitation. A wife placing her hand over her child's eyes when discipline was given to another. A husband pausing before repeating the pastor's phrases. A mother adjusting her sleeve when a bruise from a held kneeling posture showed. These gestures were small, but small gestures are where doubt hides. Doubt is the enemy of total obedience. Alan recognized this. His sermons shifted. The language hardened. The world outside was described not just as misguided, but as actively dangerous. He preached that the enemy would try to tear the church apart from the inside. That hesitation was sin. That questioning was betrayal. He spoke these words calmly, softly, without raising his voice. Control does not need volume. And so the congregation drew tighter around itself. But not all of them stayed. The first person to leave did not make an announcement. She did not confront the pastor. She simply left during a weekday, quietly, with her child, and did not return. Her absence was explained to the congregation as spiritual weakness. But outside the church, she began to speak. And systems built on silence fracture fastest when someone breaks it. The investigation that followed would reveal patterns not of faith, but of control. Not of devotion, but of obedience shaped through isolation and psychological training. The sanctuary would not stay quiet much longer. There were no locks on the church doors.
No fences. No gates.
What held people inside the house of prayer was not force. It was agreement. And agreement is far harder to break than walls. The congregation learned quickly that obedience was observed, not only by Alan, but by each other. Every gesture in the sanctuary carried meaning. How long someone held a kneeling posture. How quickly they responded to a command. Whether their expression remained calm when a child cried. In this system, the group became the enforcement mechanism. When a member hesitated, it was not Alan who corrected them first. It was another member. A reminder. A quiet hand on the back. A whispered verse. Correction delivered not as confrontation, but as care. This made enforcement feel communal, even loving. Which meant resistance felt like betrayal. One woman later described it this way: "It wasn't that we were afraid of him. We were afraid of disappointing each other." Inside the church, identity was not individual. It was shared. The weekly structure reinforced this. Mornings, scripture repetition. Not memorization. Repetition. They spoke verses aloud until they could say them without thought. Afternoons, work and chores rotated between families. Homes were cleaned. Meals prepared. Children herded in quiet groups. This created interdependence. If one family struggled, the others stepped in. If one family wavered, the others felt it. Evenings, lessons. Not sermons. Lessons were slow, steady, and always returned to the same idea. Love is obedience. Disobedience is suffering. Suffering is love returned to God. It formed a loop that never resolved. A loop that explained everything. A loop that made harm feel purposeful. Over time, members began correcting themselves before correction was needed. A glance from another member was enough to silence a question. A shift in posture communicated compliance. This is how obedience becomes culture. There were also rituals designed to bind the group. Shared fasting, announced without warning. Nights of collective prayer, no one leaving until Alan dismissed them. Testimonies where members confessed doubt publicly, and the group affirmed them back into strength. Confession was not about guilt. It was about loyalty. The more someone confessed, the deeper they belonged. Parents who struggled with disciplining their children confessed weakness. Spouses who questioned marital rearrangement confessed rebellion. Teenagers who felt resentment confessed pride. Each confession reinforced the system. Each reinforcement strengthened Alan's authority. No one enforced these rituals alone. The congregation did it together. If one person had left at that point, the group would have seen it as tragedy. A lost soul. A spirit claimed by the world. Leaving was not simply exiting a building. It was abandoning everyone you loved. This is the part outsiders rarely understand. People did not stay because they were fooled. They stayed because leaving meant losing their family, friends, marriage, children, identity. When belief shapes your entire world, there is nowhere else to go. But even the strongest systems carry stress points. The child became one. Because while adults can be trained slowly, carefully, through language and repetition, children reveal what is unspoken. Their bodies react before their minds accept. The boy's silence deepened. His eyes stopped meeting anyone's. He began to fold inward when touched. Some saw this as spiritual surrender. Others saw pain. And pain is dangerous in a community built on the denial of it. Small fractures appear first in the eyes. In the way a mother holds her child a moment too long. In the way a father flinches when discipline is mentioned. In the way an older member pauses before nodding in agreement. These moments were nearly invisible. But Alan saw everything. He responded the way authoritarian systems always respond to subtle dissent. He increased the demand for visible obedience. Longer kneeling. More shared fasting. More public testimonies. More demonstrations of unity. The sanctuary grew quieter. Tighter. More precise. The boy remained at the center of it. A test of the congregation's commitment. A mirror of their faith. A symbol of the doctrine made flesh. And slowly, without announcement, the group stopped seeing the child as a child. He became a lesson. And lessons are not protected. They are performed. The fracture would not come from pity. It would come from a single rule. If a child's spirit could not be shaped by the rod, then the family was failing. And failure had consequences. The parents would be removed from their child. This was the moment the congregation shifted from belief into possession. And once a system believes it owns its members, collapse is already written. The mother's name rarely appears in official records. In environments shaped by obedience, women's identities are often quieted long before their voices are. She had been in the house of prayer for 7 years. Long enough to learn the posture of stillness. Long enough to recite scripture without thought. Long enough to believe discipline was devotion. But belief bends differently for those who give birth. A mother's loyalty is expected to be total. The church relied on that. But that also meant the mother carried the weight of every failure of obedience. Every time the child trembled. Every time he flinched. Every time his breath stuttered under the rod. The congregation saw these moments as spiritual resistance. She saw her son. The fracture began in the smallest possible place. During evening lesson, the child was instructed to kneel. He obeyed. He always obeyed. But the moment his knees touched the floor, his body went rigid. A trembling started at his shoulders and moved down his spine. Not a dramatic shaking. Just a quiet, involuntary pulse. The kind the body does when it can no longer protect itself. Alan spoke calmly about the necessity of overcoming the body's rebellion. His tone did not change. His face did not shift. But the mother's did. Not visibly. Nothing so large. Her hand moved. She placed it on her son's back. Not to push him down. Not to correct him. Just to hold him. It was a gesture so small it should have passed unnoticed. But in a room trained to see obedience in every breath, it was monumental. The child leaned into her touch. The room stilled. No one spoke. No one moved. But everyone felt it. The mother had broken formation. Not with words. With tenderness. Tenderness in a room built on discipline is rebellion. Alan addressed her directly. Not loud. Not angry. He said only, "Do not interfere with God's work." Every eye turned to her. This is how group enforcement functions. Not through violence. Through attention. The mother withdrew her hand. Slowly. Because obedience trained into the muscles does not release easily. The child did not cry. He did not speak. He simply kept trembling. And the mother watched. The moment passed. The lesson continued. The hymn was sung. The dismissal was given. But belief systems do not break in the sanctuary. They break in silence. That night, the mother sat beside her son as he slept. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Children do not know how to hide suffering in their sleep. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. And for the first time in years, she felt something that could not be explained away. Not doubt. Not guilt. Not rebellion. Recognition. Her son was not being shaped. He was being undone. There are moments where the body knows the truth before the mind allows it. She felt it. And once felt, it could not be unfelt. But belief does not shatter cleanly. It fractures in cycles. She woke in the morning and returned to routine. Kneeling. Meal preparation. Scripture repetition. The congregation watched her, not unkindly, but attentively. To see if she would correct herself. To see if obedience would resume. Systems like this do not fear external threats. They fear hesitation. And hesitation had entered the room. Alan responded first with closeness. He visited the family, sat in their living room, spoke gently about spiritual endurance, reassured her that her son's suffering was temporary. That pain was a passage, not an end. His voice was calm, persuasive, almost compassionate. Control delivered softly is the most durable kind. But the mother's internal fracture had already widened. She did not speak of it. She did not argue. She did not resist. She simply watched. And sometimes, watching is all that is needed for a system to begin its collapse. Because once a person truly sees something, they can no longer unsee it. The mother did not change her behavior in ways anyone could name. That is the nature of quiet fracture. It shifts the center of a person, not their expression. She knelt when the congregation knelt. She repeated verses when others did. She folded her hands when prayer was called for. But she watched. And watching is dangerous in systems built on belief. Because true belief does not watch. It absorbs. The child remained the center of discipline. Not daily, but predictably. His stillness had become symbolic. A test the church believed it needed to pass. He no longer resisted. But his body remembered. His hands stayed curled. His shoulders tensed at touch. His breath stayed shallow and quick. When he knelt, he did not look up. Other children saw this. Children are mirrors. Some mimicked his stillness unconsciously. Others avoided him, as if his trembling was contagious. The congregation interpreted his quiet as progress. The mother recognized it as withdrawal. But recognition is not action. Action requires permission. And the mother had none. Silence became her rebellion. Not absence of speech, absence of agreement. When others nodded during lessons, she did not. When hymns repeated, she mouthed the words but did not sing. When correction was given to another child, her eyes did not turn away, but they did not affirm. These are gestures no one can punish. They are too small, too private, too easily denied. But authority feels deviation even when it cannot name it. Alan watched her. Not constantly, just enough to remind her that nothing internal stays internal forever. The next shift came through marriage discipline. In the house of prayer, husbands were considered the spiritual head of the household. If a wife wavered, the husband was responsible for her correction. If he failed to correct her, the congregation corrected him. Obedience was not individual. It was structural. The mother's husband was not cruel. He was devout. Devotion in this context meant compliance, not malice. He began watching her the way the congregation watched him. Not with suspicion. With responsibility. He encouraged more prayer. He suggested fasting. He suggested she seek counsel from elder women, who would repeat the doctrine in soft, practiced tones. A child's spirit must learn surrender. A mother's heart must not interfere. These women did not see themselves as enforcers. They saw themselves as protectors. Protectors of order. Protectors of the soul. The mother listened. She nodded. She thanked them. But she did not agree. And something else had begun. The child had started watching her. Children learn not through instruction, but through recognition. He saw her stillness. He saw her hands remain steady even when his did not. He saw her silence, not as obedience, but as presence. He began to lean toward her again. Not visibly. Just a slight shift of posture. The kind only someone watching him closely would notice. The mother noticed. So did Alan. He increased the frequency of public testimonies. Members were asked to confess doubt. Confession was not punishment. It was a ritual of surrender. He waited for the mother to stand, to speak, to return herself to the system. She did not. She sat through testimony in stillness. Not defiant. Not resistant. Simply present. This was the first open rupture, and it made no sound. After service, an elder woman approached her. Gently. With concern, not accusation. "Your heart is troubled," she said. The mother did not deny it. She did not confirm it either. She simply asked, How do you know when suffering is shaping the spirit, and when it is breaking it? The question was dangerous. Not because it accused. Because it named doubt in a language the congregation did not have an answer for. The elder woman hesitated. Only for a breath. But hesitation is a fracture. The mother saw it. So did the congregation. So did Alan. This was the moment the system understood something had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. Once a question exists, silence cannot hold forever. The collapse had begun. But collapse does not arrive quickly. It arrives like erosion. Silent. Patient. Inevitable. The mother did not plan to leave. There were no packed bags, no whispered escape routes, no hidden signals or nighttime departures. Leaving was not a thought that arrived fully formed. It surfaced slowly, the way light leaks into a room before sunrise. It began with a walk. Members often walked the grounds behind the church after evening service. The land was flat and quiet, bordered by pine trees that held sound instead of carrying it. Most walked in pairs or small groups, discussing lessons in low, steady voices. The mother walked alone. Her son walked beside her, small steps matching hers without instruction. His hand did not reach for hers. His hands rarely moved freely now. But he stayed close. Silence here did not feel like devotion. It felt like waiting. Another woman joined her. Not an elder. Not a disciplinarian. A young mother whose first child was barely old enough to speak. She did not mention faith. Or obedience. Or discipline. She simply said, "He trembles so much." Not accusing. Not questioning doctrine. Just naming what had been seen. The mother did not respond. But the sentence landed in the space between them and stayed. In systems like this, the first departure attempt is not physical. It is perceptual. One person names reality. Another person lets the naming stand. Reality becomes shared. And shared reality is the enemy of controlled belief. Over the next days, the two women continued to walk. Never discussing leaving. Never discussing disobedience. Only describing what they saw, the child's hands. His breath. The way he stared at the floor instead of at people. Descriptions are not rebellion. They are witnessing. Witnessing is step 1. Step 2 came during a lesson on parental authority. Alan spoke about the necessity of breaking the will early. Not the spirit, he emphasized, but the will. He described the will as the part of the child that resists, questions, holds itself apart. He said the will must be subdued for the spirit to flourish. The mother listened. The young woman listened. The child knelt. His shoulders trembled. The mother did not move. Not visibly. But the young woman's breath caught. A sound small enough that no one else heard it. But the mother did. The congregation continued. The hymns continued. The lessons continued. But something had shifted. Two people now saw the same thing. Systems held together by silence do not endure shared seeing. The attempt to leave came quietly. Not through defiance. Through absence. One morning, the mother did not bring her son to the day prayer circle. She kept him home. No statement.
No confrontation.
Just the smallest possible withdrawal from the collective rhythm. This is the exact moment where high-control communities act. Not later. Not after thought. Immediately. 3 women came to the house before noon.
No anger. No accusations. No threats.
They brought casserole. This is how control maintains itself, through care that has conditions. They asked if she was tired. They asked if her spirit felt heavy. They offered to pray with her. The mother allowed it. She knew refusal would be noticed. The women placed hands on her shoulders, on her child's back, on the walls of the home itself, as if the structure held spiritual residue that required cleansing. They spoke softly. She must not allow the child's suffering to confuse her purpose. This was the warning. Not a threat. A reminder. The mother nodded. She thanked them. She returned to service that evening. From the congregation's perspective, obedience had been restored. But withdrawal, once tasted even briefly, does not disappear. It returns as a pulse. The mother now knew she could refrain. She could alter the rhythm, even slightly. And the young woman knew too. Two minds moving quietly in parallel is how collapse begins. Not with shouting. With agreement. Agreement, once redirected, becomes exit. Pressure does not return all at once. It returns in adjustments. The first adjustment was time. Evening lessons ran longer. Not dramatically, just enough that exhaustion settled into the bones before dismissal. Tired minds comply more easily. Tired bodies kneel more quickly. The second adjustment was attention. The child was now placed nearer the front. Not as punishment. As example. Alan spoke about shaping with patience, and the congregation watched the boy as he knelt, his shoulders trembling softly beneath his shirt. The mother sat behind him. Her posture was perfect. Her face unreadable. She did not interfere. Her stillness was her protection. The young woman watched as well. Not her child. Not her burden. But she watched as if it were. This is how dissent spreads. Not through argument. Through witnessing. The congregation began to fracture in three directions. 1. The devout, those who believed discipline was love. They saw the boy as testimony. They felt certainty. 2. The observers, those who hesitated. They watched the boy and the mother. They felt something they did not name. 3. The fearful, not fearful of harm. Fearful of doubt. They clung tighter to obedience. Alan felt this shift before anyone spoke of it. Leaders of closed systems sense internal temperature like weather. He responded with ritual. A fast was announced. 3 days. No explanation needed. Fasting creates vulnerability. Vulnerability invites confession. Confession strengthens unity. On the second evening of the fast, the congregation gathered in the sanctuary.
No chairs. No lectern.
Just open floor and dim light. They knelt in rows. Silence. Breathing. Heartbeat. The sound of bodies present but restrained. Then, scripture recitation, in unison, slow and measured. Not spoken. Chanted. The child knelt at the front. His breathing uneven. His back rigid. His hands curled. The mother knelt behind him. Her breathing steady. Her eyes open. Alan walked among them. Not touching. Just passing. Observation as control. He paused near the child. He spoke quietly, so quiet only the mother heard. His spirit is resisting. You must not hold him back. The words were not threat. They were position. The mother was being told that her love was now the obstacle. She did not respond. There was nothing she could say that would not be used against her. The recitation continued. The room swayed with slow repetition. And then it came. The child's body gave. Not a collapse. Not a scream. Just a tremor that moved through him, a visible shudder his small frame could not contain. The room did not gasp. The room did not react. They watched.
Alan steppet closer.
This should be the moment of discipline. This is when most systems apply force. But Alan did not touch the child. He touched the mother's shoulder. A slight pressure. 2 fingers. Barely weight at all. It meant, you must surrender him. The mother's breath caught, once, a sound so quiet only the child would have heard it. He did. He shifted. He leaned. His body leaned backwards, toward her, without looking. Not seeking protection. Seeking anchor. This was the break. Small. Silent. Irreversible. A child leaning toward his mother in fear is ordinary. But in the house of prayer, it was apostasy. The room watched the lean. The tremor. The contact that did not occur, but wanted to. The mother did not move. Not even to comfort him. And that was the most devastating thing. She had learned to be still. Obedience had taught her to abandon instinct. But the watching had changed her. Her stillness now meant something different. She was not obeying. She was waiting. Waiting is not submission. Waiting is decision. The congregation did not understand the difference yet. But Alan did. His expression did not shift. His posture did not alter. But something in his eyes did. He had seen stillness used against him. Control had met patience. Systems like this do not break at the moment of rebellion. They break at the moment of recognition. And the child did not look at the pastor. He looked at his mother. Recognition shared. Two bodies aligned. The sanctuary was silent. Not devotional silence. Something else. The kind of silence that precedes the sound of something beginning to fall. The split did not arrive through confrontation. There were no raised voices.
No acquiesctions.
No declarations of leaving. It arrived through alignment. When the child leaned toward his mother, and the mother did not correct him, the congregation separated into two groups without moving. Those who saw rebellion, and those who saw fear. The difference was not in what they witnessed. It was in what they allowed themselves to understand. The devout kept their heads bowed, because to see the child's suffering clearly would require reinterpreting their own. The observers lifted their eyes. Just slightly. Just enough to acknowledge the moment. The fearful squeezed their hands tighter. Because doubt had shape now, and it was small enough to hold. Alan felt the room shift in temperature, not colder, not warmer, just less controlled. This was the danger. Not the mother. Not the child. But the possibility of interpretation. If one person could see the trembling as pain instead of resistance, then others could too. Control relies on a single narrative. The moment multiple narratives exist, collapse has already begun. Alan responded the only way systems like this know how. He increased clarity. He stepped forward, placed his hand gently on the child's back, a gesture that appeared tender, but positioned himself between mother and son. He spoke to the congregation, not loudly, not emotionally. A spirit that resists must be guided with firmness. A mother must not allow her heart to interfere. Love requires strength. The words were precise, designed to suggest that the child's suffering was the mother's failure, not the system's harm. This is how guilt becomes a leash. Not through accusation, but through implication. The mother lowered her eyes. Not in surrender. In calculation. To leave, she would need to not be seen leaving. She would need the system to believe she was still inside it. This is how escape begins in closed environments. Not outwardly. Internally. The next day, she resumed routine. She worked. She prayed. She knelt. But the young woman now watched her the way she once watched the pastor. Two women. Silent. Aligned in recognition. The child no longer trembled only in response to discipline. He trembled in anticipation of it. Anticipation is the deepest form of harm. It means the body has learned fear so completely that it prepares before the stimulus arrives. The mother saw this. The young woman saw this. The congregation saw the mother seeing this. This was the split. Not physical. Perceptual. The devout avoided her. Not cruelly. Instinctively. Because to stand near someone who sees clearly is to risk seeing as well. The observers hovered near her. Not to declare solidarity. Just to be close enough to understand what might come next. The fearful began speaking softly with each other when she entered a room. Not openly. Just a shift in posture, a change in silence. In communities like this, silence carries meaning long before language does. Alan felt the shift growing. So he did what leaders of obedience-based systems always do. He attempted to isolate the variable. He arranged for the child to stay with another family during lesson hours. Not as punishment. As support. The explanation was gentle, framed as help. Sometimes a mother's heart clouds discipline. Sometimes another hand can guide more clearly. If the mother agreed, she would be surrendering custody in practice. If she refused, she would be revealing disobedience. There was no correct answer. And the congregation waited. Not for her words. For her stillness. Because stillness had become her language. The mother did not argue. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply said, "He needs to stay with me." 9 words. Even. Unraised. Without emphasis. But in a system where obedience is the air, 9 calm words can be revolt. The room did not react. Reactions are dangerous. Instead, they waited for Alan to speak. He did not. Silence expanded between them until the sanctuary felt smaller. This was not a victory. This was a line. And lines, once drawn, must be crossed. Not loudly, but soon. The collapse was no longer theoretical. It was scheduled. The break did not come during a sermon, or in the sanctuary, or under scripture. It came in the small hours of morning, when the world was quiet enough for truth to be heard without interference. The mother woke before sunrise. Not startled. Not shaken. Simply awake.
Her sonleyi beside her.
His breathing shallow. The tremors had become almost constant now, even in sleep. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. She placed her hand near him, not touching, just close enough to feel the heat of his skin. There was no revelation. No sudden decision. The choice had already been made days earlier. Recognition always comes first. Action simply arrives later. She dressed him. Slowly. Quietly. Not as escape. As routine. This is important. She was not running. She was leaving. Running implies fear. Leaving implies clarity. She stepped outside. The air was cold. The grass held dew. The sky was still dark, but the faintest suggestion of morning traced the horizon. She walked. Not quickly. Not urgently. Just forward. There were no locked doors to open. No guards to pass. No obstacles except the weight of silence. The child walked beside her. His small hand did not reach for hers. But he stayed close. When she reached the road, she did not look back. Not because she was certain, but because looking back can undo resolve. She walked toward town. It was 3 miles. She carried no bag. No documents.
No explanation.
Leaving a closed system rarely involves objects. Only distance. At the halfway point, a car slowed beside her. It was the young woman. The one who had watched. The one who had named tremors out loud. She did not ask where the mother was going. She did not ask whether she needed help. She simply unlocked the passenger door. The mother and child got in. The young woman drove. No words. Words were too fragile for what was happening. They drove past the grocery store. Past the school. Past the quiet houses that had never known what happened in the sanctuary. They drove to the police station. Not because the mother believed the police would save her, but because she understood something essential. Authority must confront authority. If the church believed it had ownership of the child, then she had to place herself before an authority that could challenge that claim in the language the church respected, legal structure. Inside the station, she spoke only one sentence: "My child is not safe."
No accusations. No explanation.
Just truth. Statements like this require witnesses. The young woman spoke next. She did not speak of doctrine. She did not speak of belief. She did not speak of faith. She described the trembling, the kneeling, the silence. The police listened. Bureaucracy is slow, but mandated reporting is not. A welfare investigation was opened that day. When officials arrived at the church, the congregation was calm. They always were. Stillness was their language. Alan met them at the door. His voice was measured. His expression composed. He spoke of lies. Of misunderstanding. Of spiritual attack. He did not deny discipline. He reframed it. Correction, he said, is an expression of love. But something had shifted. The congregation's stillness no longer moved with his. They watched him. Not for guidance. For outcome. This was the fracture made visible. Before, they believed his interpretation of reality. Now, they were waiting to see if reality would confirm him. Authority is not belief. Authority is consensus. And consensus had begun to slip. The investigation did not dismantle the church in a single action. No collapse happens in an instant. Members left slowly. One family. Then another. Then one who had believed more deeply than all the rest. No one announced departure. They simply stopped appearing. Absence became message. The sanctuary grew quieter. Not reverent. Empty. Control held as long as there were witnesses to sustain it. Without them, doctrine was only words. The church did not close its doors immediately. It faded. Like anything built on silence. No one marked the day the church ended. There was no final sermon, no final hymn, no declaration that the house of prayer had closed. Systems built on obedience do not collapse noisily. They dissolve. Members stopped coming. The pews emptied week by week, not all at once. Some families moved to neighboring towns. Others returned to churches they had once attended. A few tried to rebuild community among themselves, without structure, without correction. But rebuilding requires language, and many no longer trusted their own. The sanctuary remained standing. The hymn books remained open. The floor still held the imprint of kneeling. Places remember what people try to forget. The mother never returned. Not even to see the building after its quiet abandonment. Leaving was not escape. It was survival. She did not speak publicly about the church. Not to reporters. Not in interviews. Not in memoirs. Silence can wound. But silence can also protect. Her child recovered slowly. Recovery is not reversal. The body unlearns fear in small increments. First in breath. Then in posture. Then in sleep. There were still tremors at night. They did not disappear. They softened. He learned to look up again. Not quickly. Not confidently. Just sometimes. The young woman did not remain in town. She left within the year.
No dramatic reasoning.
Just understanding that places shape what people remember. And she needed space where the silence did not echo. Alan continued to preach for a time. Not in large congregations. Not with authority. Just to those who still needed certainty. Even when systems collapse, belief rarely ends. It simply disperses. Not everyone who left understood what had happened to them. Not fully. Not immediately. Understanding rarely arrives in the moment of harm. It arrives years later, in quiet flashes. A way of speaking. A reaction to anger. A difficulty trusting tenderness. A child's hand tensing when touched. Control leaves its signature slowly. Some survivors speak of it as if emerging from deep water. Not gasping. Just realizing they had been holding their breath for years. The house of prayer did not become infamous. It did not enter folklore or national memory. Its story exists mostly in fragments. Court documents. Recorded testimonies. Second-hand recollections. Whispers in small towns that prefer not to remember. Most of the world never learned its name. But the absence of notoriety does not mean the story is small. Some of the darkest histories are the quiet ones. The ones that do not demand attention. The ones that happen in plain sight. Because horror is not always spectacle. Sometimes it is obedience. Sometimes it is stillness. Sometimes it is the soft voice that says discipline is love. And sometimes it is the silence required to leave. The sanctuary remains standing. The floor still holds the shape of kneeling. But no one kneels there now. And if you like this story, check out the ones on your screen. The dark algorithm thinks you'll enjoy these too.